name is Olatunde Oludansi. So how do you get funding?
What is their consumption?
So you can't say to me that you're worth close to $2 million.
I keep 500,000 in exchange of 20% of my business.
Offer 12% equity. We need 7.5 million naira to invest in.
Are you sure you understand this business fully?
For this.
If you think that the startup world is a nightmare for entrepreneurs, wait until you hear about the biggest nightmare of all, which happens to be the funding world. As Africa becomes a new home for more startup companies with about 4,000 registered between 2018 and 2022, new problems have emerged and investors are no longer having it. What is driving this crisis? And how is it impacting the future of African startups? Stay with us as we expose the dark side of startup funding in Africa. Every year, hundreds of African founders pitch their companies to investors in search of capital to fund their billion-dollar ideas, and they have become quite successful at it. Back in 2015, startups in the region were able to secure a total of $400 million in funding, a figure that has skyrocketed to $4.8 billion in 2021. With these massive sums, all that is left for these founders is to focus on growing their businesses into profitable ventures and earning returns for their investors. But in some cases, poor decisions are made and millions of dollars are washed down the drain, leaving nothing to show for it. Take Mara for example, a crypto exchange startup launched by Nigerian entrepreneur Chinyere Chi Nnamdi in 2021. During its initial funding, Mara quickly raised an impressive $70 million from investors like Coinbase, FTX, and nearly 100 other partners. This breakthrough seemed like the perfect launchpad for Mara to dominate the African crypto space, especially with the introduction of the Mara wallet in 2023, which reportedly amassed 4.5 million verified users. But as the saying goes, not all that glitters is gold. Behind the scenes, Mara's management was falling apart, and so was its financial stability. By 2023, the company had burnt through roughly $16 million, much of which was channeled into extravagant salaries, bonuses, and benefits to attract top talents. According to the CEO, these expenditures were essential to delivering world-class services. But in practice, the lavish spending failed to translate into operational efficiency. The only thing that managed to keep the company afloat despite these challenges was the marketing department, which was working hard to maintain Mara's image while also eating up the company's reserves. As internal disputes mounted, executives started leaving, and the financial situation deteriorated further. In a last-ditch effort to survive, Mara laid off 85% of its workers and reduced the salaries of the remaining staff, but these measures barely made a change. To make matters worse, reports revealed that many of the platform's 4.5 million users were fake, created to exploit a flawed referral program. Amid growing scrutiny, CEO Chinyere Nnamdi quickly dissolved Mara and made the bold move to launch a new venture named Jara, where investors were redirected with promises of equity transfers. This move only sparked further controversy, with some former executive accusing Nnamdi of attempting to dodge the financial liabilities that came with the collapse of Mara. Zooming out a little, it is apparent that Mara's investors weren't the only ones grappling with disappointment. Around the same time, a leading global software investor named Insight Partners had decided to pause its investments in African startups for the meantime. According to sources, this decision was taken as a result of the collapse of Dash, one of its African portfolio companies. Founded in 2019 by a Ghanaian entrepreneur named Prince Boakie Boampong, Dash aimed to establish a payment network between digital wallets and bank accounts to simplify cross-border transactions. It was an innovative initiative at the time, which was why nobody had doubted the CEO when he claimed that his fintech app featured over 200,000 users and had processed up to 250 million in transactions since its launch. This was around late 2021 to 2022, a time when Africa's startup ecosystem saw a lot of money, and Dash managed to raise about $8 million. The injection of such capital into Dash acted like a growth steroid, which resulted in the CEO Prince Boampong announcing 5 months later that the platform had reached 1 million users and achieved a significant milestone of processing $1 billion in transactions. As anticipated, this rapid growth impressed and attracted more investors, sparking another funding round that saw Dash secure an additional $32.8 million with contributions from certain high-profile firms. The world held its breath, waiting to hear of another growth milestone from Dash. But unfortunately, all that followed next was bad news. In early 2023, discrepancies were discovered regarding the company's user metrics and financial report. Internal investigation revealed that Boampong had allegedly been exaggerating the numbers of users and transaction figures, giving investors a false picture of his company's growth. This revelation led the board members to suspend and later replace him with Kenneth Kinchua as CEO, inasmuch as the damage had already been done. But that was not all. As time went on, red flags soon surfaced on the company's financial records, which included a missing $25 million that was never accounted for and a monthly expenditure of $500,000 for operation cost, which was very unjustifiable. Amid these revelations, further allegations indicated that Boampong had been using the company's fund to purchase houses, buy expensive cars, and sponsor a luxurious lifestyle. At this point, it was almost impossible to salvage anything from the leftovers of Boampong's mistakes. With mounting financial pressures, no revenue streams, and declining investor confidence, Dash was forced to shut down in October 2023, further declining the confidence of foreign investors in the African startup ecosystem. This didn't mean that the popular narrative as of then was a totally negative one, as there were companies like Flutterwave, which secured a $250 million funding in 2022, Yoko, which received $83 million in 2021, and Cheaper Cash, which raised $150 million that same year. All continued doing well and growing properly on their funding checks despite the challenges they faced individually. These successful African companies were all coming from the fintech sector, as were other young companies that were springing up at the time. But as time went on, the saturation of the market led investors to begin looking for new sectors that hadn't been explored yet and to collaborate with African entrepreneurs with new, fresh ideas. To take advantage of the lending sector, an untapped market with opportunities for growth, Nigerian co-founders named Olumuyiwa Faulkner and Aziz Oluwafemi launched Black Copper in 2022, a digital lending platform that aimed to provide collateral-free loans to individuals and small businesses. While it was apparent that the lending business was a risky one in a country like Nigeria, a prominent reason why the traditional banks have avoided it like a plague, Black Copper aimed to change the status quo and break beyond the 6.2% of the population who could only access bank loans. This bold idea stimulated investors from all angles, including Techstars, an investment company dedicated to providing capital for startup companies to seek partnerships. Prior to its launch, Faulkner and his partner were lucky enough to secure sufficient capital from different entities to finance their lending service, after which they were expected to generate returns for these debt investors. The Techstars-backed company successfully disbursed over 60,000 loans for a start, which it had given to customers over the internet. But as time went on, recovering these loans became a serious challenge, and nobody would have said that they didn't see it coming. Black Copper revealed that they had been fooled by their borrowers, who either provided false information during the KYC process or simply disappeared after being credited. Meanwhile, the remaining other defaulters were just unable to pay. Although the platform decided that it was going to collaborate with loan recovery companies to get hold of debtors, The CEO Faulkner didn't believe that it was an effective solution. According to him, chasing down small loans of 5,000 to 10,000 naira from thousands of defaulters was financially unstable, but would have been a better idea if it were just a few individuals owing large amounts. The company was soon burdened with 1.2 billion naira, or about $1.5 million in outstanding debt, of which it had only managed to pay back 200 million naira over a span of 18 months. Around 75 investors who had loaned funds to the startup found themselves with little to no returns, and many blamed Faulkner for failing to notify them of the company's financial crisis in time. Amid his company's devastating condition, Faulkner's relocation to Canada with his family further heightened tension, with some investors interpreting it as an attempt to evade accountability. Faulkner, however, insisted that the move was for his wife's education and not an escape from the company's troubles. However, investors remained very critical over Faulkner's claim that all customers defaulted, as many blamed him for having a poor risk assessment strategy, while some accused him of possibly swindling investors of their money and vanishing, leaving no hopes of a resolution. But this would not be the first time an African startup founder would be accused of deserting with investors' money. Egyptian brothers and entrepreneurs Mahmoud and Hamed Noah were reported to have fled with about $33 million of investors' fund in 2022 after being fired from their executive roles by the company's board members. Founded by the Noah brothers, Mahmoud and Ahmed, Capiter, an e-commerce company, initially showed promise after securing $33 million in funding in September 2021. However, it only took a year later for the company's situation to sour dramatically. As the year progressed, Capiter began facing significant operational challenges, with reports indicating that it struggled to onboard merchants while simultaneously running out of funds. This led to a massive layoff of around 100 employees to cut operational costs, while concerns began to grow within the company about its future. By September 2022, things took a turn for the worse, when the founding brothers were dismissed from their executive roles amid allegations of financial mismanagement, which included embezzlement accusations. They were faulted for not fulfilling their duties, especially during critical moments when discussions about a potential merger company were taking place. As these discussions unfolded, the brothers reportedly absconded the country, according to news sources, allegedly taking $33 million of the company's funds with them. This cripple move left the company with very little to sustain itself, as investors quickly stopped funding the company once they noticed it was in distress. Capiter continued to struggle until it had reached a point where it could no longer pay its employees, cover operational costs, or settle the millions of dollars that they owed to creditors. This left the company no alternative but to shut down silently, leaving a vacuum that sent ripples throughout the corporate world of Egypt. While there are inspiring success stories from Africa's startup ecosystem, the darker realities of greed, poor decision-making, and financial mismanagement continue to undermine progress, leaving behind severe consequences for both businesses and the broader market. Among these consequences is the growing distrust among foreign investors. According to a report by The Guardian, investors now tend to gravitate towards African startups that are led by immigrants rather than those founded by indigenous Africans. This troubling narrative only highlights the already deep-seated lack of confidence in the ability of local entrepreneurs to effectively manage and grow their ventures, further complicating the efforts of young stars to put Africa on the map. Meanwhile, the stark reality remains that even as the African business landscape holds immense potential, the troubling cases of mismanagement and fraud cannot be ignored. With a problematic decline in investor confidence and trust, there is an urgent need to rebuild trust in indigenous entrepreneurship. The role of African governments in reversing these trends cannot be overstated, as more is needed to be done in enacting better regulations in the corporate space, enforcing accountability measures, and fostering an environment that reassures foreign investors. Without this, the dark side of Africa's startup landscape would only get darker, resulting in further negative impacts to the reputation of the continent's entrepreneurs, to its business landscape, and to the overall economy.